Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Lostville Chronicles. Tonight's story takes us deep into one of America's most overlooked historical mysteries, a tragedy hidden inside a program meant to save children, but may have quietly erased them instead. If you're watching in the dark, keep a light nearby, because tonight's mystery comes from real records, real railway logs, and forgotten testimonies from the winter of 1899. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far this community reaches. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let's uncover the truth behind the orphan train that never arrived. The winter of 1899 pressed hard against the East Coast when Orphan train number 47 pulled out of the New York City station just before dawn. Steam rose in pale ribbons, drifting across the frozen platforms as the last of the placement agents checked their lists, stamped their forms, and hurried the children aboard. Most of the little ones were bundled in second-hand coats, boots too big or too small, tags pinned to their collars bearing nothing but a name and an age, if they knew their age at all. The manifest for this journey was unusually full. 31 children, the youngest barely 5, the oldest 13. Their destination was Nebraska, where farmers and families waited to adopt them, sometimes out of kindness, sometimes out of need for labor. At the center of the operation stood Mr. Jonathan Alcott, a thin, rigid man with the posture of someone who had never bent for anything in his life. He signed off the final paperwork inside the conductor's office, dipping his pen with practiced care. His handwriting was sharp, narrow, and unwavering. 31, he said to the conductor. 31, the conductor repeated. But several staff members noticed something peculiar. As Alcott held the manifest, his hand trembled, not from cold, not from age, but from something like unease. He kept glancing toward the children already seated in the rail cars, his eyes settling too long on the last 2 rows. Then, with a stiff nod, he closed the ledger and tucked it under his arm. The train's whistle cut the morning in half. No. 47 rolled west. For the first stretch of the journey, everything appeared routine. Telegraph poles flickered by the windows, children slept, cried, clung to their satchels. Alcott paced the aisle with mechanical precision, correcting posture, straightening hats, reminding the older children to smile when the time comes. He avoided the back of the car entirely. By the time they reached Illinois, the first telegraph confirmation came through. Train 47 arrived with 31 aboard, all accounted for. But when the train pushed onward into the cold Nebraska plains, something shifted. At a way station outside Topeka, the manifest was checked again by a clerk preparing placement forms. He flipped through the pages, frowned, then counted the names again. 26, not 31. "Sir," the clerk said, approaching Alcott, "your numbers don't match what was reported in Illinois." Alcott straightened his coat. "Clerical error." "But the telegraph—" "Clerical error," he repeated, sharper this time. When the clerk insisted on recounting, Alcott snapped the ledger shut and placed it firmly under his arm. His knuckles were white. "The children are tired. You're confusing yourself." The clerk said nothing further. Something in Alcott's stare froze the conversation in its tracks. Hours later, when the train reached Wood Hollow, families gathered at the platform. Mothers clutching blankets, farmers ready to take in extra hands, widows hoping for company in their empty homes. 26 children stepped off. Someone in the crowd asked, "Weren't there supposed to be more?" Alcott smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just a misprint on the earlier manifest. Happens all the time." He handed out the paperwork quickly, too quickly, as if speed could prevent questions from forming. But several locals noticed the ink on the manifest. Names scratched out, lines rewritten, margins smudged as though pages had been handled far more than necessary. 5 names were missing, not forgotten, removed. and the train rolled away before anyone could ask again. The sun was already sinking when train number 47 slowed along the curve leading into Wood Hollow, Nebraska, a place so small it barely appeared on the maps, but large enough to host the Orphan train placements twice a year. The platform was dusted with snow, lanterns swinging in the rising wind as families pressed forward, eager to catch the first glimpse of the children. Wood Hollow was the kind of town where news travelled faster than the cold. Everyone knew the train was coming. Everyone knew the number. 31 children expected. Mothers had cooked extra stew. Farmers had swept guest rooms. Even the town pastor had gathered blankets and hymn books, hoping to ready the children for new beginnings. But when the brass wheels ground to a halt and the doors opened, something felt wrong immediately. Only 26 children stepped out. No stragglers appeared behind them. No small hands clung to suitcase handles. No timid faces peered cautiously from the windows. Just 26, lined up neatly by Mr. Alcott, whose breath came fast and shallow in the icy air. He called out their names one by one, his tone clipped, hurried. A few children hesitated, looking behind them as if expecting someone else to emerge. Others kept their eyes lowered, clutching their coats tightly. Mrs. Harper, who had volunteered to help coordinate families, frowned. "Mr. Alcott, was there a problem? The telegram said 31 were aboard." Alcott didn't pause. "Telegram was wrong. Happens frequently." "But Illinois—" "Clerical error," he snapped. A ripple of discomfort rolled through the crowd. Wood Hollow wasn't the kind of town used to sharp answers, but something about Alcott's expression, a tightness around his eyes, a tension in his jaw, silenced further questions. The placement began. Families stepped forward. A farmer with calloused hands lifted a small boy in a patched coat, smiling warmly. A widow wrapped her arms around a pale girl with wide eyes. One by one, the children were claimed, their tags removed, their futures sealed. But several townspeople noticed odd details the more they watched. One girl kept glancing back at the train door, her lips parted as if waiting for someone who never appeared. A boy of about 8 wouldn't let go of another child's scarf, until Alcott forcibly pried his fingers away before sending him to a waiting couple. And in the last row of the departing group, 3 children whispered among themselves, their expressions troubled, as if they knew something they weren't allowed to say. Then came the detail no one could make sense of. Sheriff Adler, standing at the far end of the platform, spotted fresh footprints inside the train car as he glanced through the open door, small ones, scattered, overlapping. More than 26 sets. But when he counted, the number didn't match. Alcott slammed the door shut before he could look further. "Loading out," the agent declared. "No need for anyone to step inside." But Adler wasn't convinced. Something about the air inside the car felt disturbed, warmer, even though the winter wind had slipped through every open gap. As the train prepared to roll away, a young boy tugged the sheriff's coat. "They weren't supposed to leave," he whispered. "Who?" Adler asked. "The other ones," the boy said, voice quivering. "They were here before, but now they're not." Adler looked back toward Alcott, but the agent had already boarded, pulling the door shut behind him, locking in whatever truth lay inside. Sheriff Adler couldn't sleep the night train number 47 left Wood Hollow. Something in the way the children stepped off, the missing 5, the trembling hands, the agent's frantic insistence that everything was normal, lodged itself in his chest like a splinter he couldn't dig out. By dawn, he saddled his horse and rode north toward the stretch of track where the train had slowed the night before arrival. Snow still blanketed the prairie, soft and untouched, except for a strange disturbance near the telegraph pole at mile marker 12. That's where he saw them. Footprints. Small ones. Too small for adults. They trailed away from the railroad line in a single file, each step pressed perfectly into the frost, as if the walkers were careful, quiet, leaving no signs except the impressions themselves. The sheriff dismounted, crouching low. The prints were fresh, crisp edges, no wind-blown snow inside. Someone, no, several children, had walked this route within the past 24 hours. He followed the trail. At first the prints ran straight, purposeful. Then, about 50 yards in, they shifted, separating into two short paths, then merging again. It was the kind of behavior he'd expect from children who weren't sure where they were going, or who were trying to stay close in the cold. But what troubled him most was this. There were 5 sets. 5. The exact number missing from the manifest. His breath clouded in the still air as he pressed onward. The tracks continued across the prairie toward a stand of bare cottonwoods. The trees swayed softly in the morning wind, their branches creaking. Halfway to the grove, the sheriff stopped. The footprints, all 5, ended abruptly in the middle of an open field. No scattering, no return trail, no drag marks, no signs of an animal attack. Just 5 impressions in the snow, and then nothing. It was as if the children had stepped into the earth or simply vanished into the air. Adler knelt again, touching the final print. The snow around it was smooth, untouched. No melting, no disturbance from wind. It was perfect. Too perfect. As if the last step had been pressed intentionally. A cold prickle travelled up his spine. Behind him, the telegraph line hummed faintly. A thin, metallic vibration like distant whispering. He turned, scanning for workers. There were none. The line had been reported faulty for weeks, barely carrying messages. Yet now it trembled, the wire thrumming with a steady pulse. He followed the hum to the pole at mile marker 12. Frost clung to the wood in thick crystals, but as he touched it, the vibration seemed to grow stronger, more deliberate, almost like tapping. 5 taps. He jerked his hand back. The prairie wind picked up, shuddering through the cottonwoods. For a moment, Adler thought he heard something carried on the gust, a faint sound, high and thin, like a child calling out from a distance too great to measure. He scanned the empty field. Nothing moved, no tracks but his own, no sign of any living soul. But the 5 footprints remained behind him, stamped into the snow like a message, not lost, not runaway, not forgotten, taken. And whatever had happened to those children hadn't happened a mile from the tracks. It had happened right beside them. By the time Sheriff Adler returned to Wood Hollow, the sun was dropping behind the grain silos, casting long shadows across the abandoned rail yard. The depot workers were already closing up when he arrived, but the sheriff didn't head toward them. Instead, he walked straight to the far end of the yard, to the lone boxcar that had been left behind after train number 47 departed. It shouldn't have been there, not according to Alcott's earlier explanation. He told the townsfolk the railway had detached a damaged car in Illinois. But here it was, locked, sealed, and sitting on Wood Hollow's siding like a forgotten coffin. A cold draft swept across the yard as Adler approached. The metal siding of the boxcar was rimed with frost, even though the day had been mild. His boots crunched on the gravel. He paused at the doors. That's when he heard it. Knock. A single, sharp tap from inside. He froze. Silence followed, so complete he could hear his own pulse in his ears. He leaned closer. Knock. Knock. 2 taps this time. Measured, soft, like tiny knuckles against heavy wood. His hand went to the pistol at his hip. Not because he feared a threat, but because something about the sound felt wrong. Children knocking would come with crying, pleading, voices. This was different. A slow, deliberate rhythm, almost patterned. He pressed his ear against the cold metal. After a breathless pause, the tapping resumed. This time it was 3 knocks, then silence. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 knocks again. A repeated signal. Adler whispered to himself, "Someone's trapped inside." Though even as he said it, the hairs on his arms rose. He reached for the latch. It was frozen shut, solid as stone. He braced his shoulder and shoved, but the door didn't budge. The hinges had been locked from the outside with a lead seal stamped by the Children's Aid Society. It gleamed faintly in the dusk. No one should have sealed it. No one should be inside. Adler stepped back, scanning for anyone in the yard. No workers, no porter, not even Alcott. Just the sheriff and the silent boxcar. He tried again. "Hello? Can you hear me?" For a moment there was nothing. Then 4 knocks. Rapid, urgent, close to the door. He jumped backward. The rhythm was changing. 3 knocks, 4 knocks, then 5. 5. The same number missing from the manifest. A cold rush travelled down his spine. He drew his knife and struck the lead seal, trying to snap it. The metal dented but didn't crack. He struck it again and again, his breath fogged in the air. Behind the door, the knocks stopped abruptly. Then a new sound emerged, a soft, dragging noise, like something sliding across the wooden floor toward the far end of the car, followed by a sound he would never forget. A whisper. So faint, he wondered if he imagined it. "Don't open." The sheriff staggered back. The whisper had been a child's voice, thin, trembling, but layered underneath it was something else. A second voice, older, lower, almost like 2 people speaking in the same breath. Adler dropped his knife. He didn't open the boxcar. He couldn't. Not after hearing that. He backed away slowly, heart hammering as dusk swallowed the rail yard. In the gathering dark, the boxcar sat silent once more, but its presence felt heavier, occupied, watched. By nightfall, the sheriff knew one thing with chilling certainty. Whatever left those footprints in the snow was still inside that car, and it did not want to be freed. Sheriff Adler didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table, lantern burning low, staring at the dented lead seal he'd sliced off the boxcar door. The thing was heavier than it should have been, stamped with the Children's Aid Society insignia, but the back of it was scratched, as if someone inside the car had clawed at it. By morning, he made a decision. He'd return to the rail yard, not to open the car, but to document it, measure it, understand it. Something in his bones told him the railway wasn't going to leave it sitting there long. He was right. When he arrived at dawn, 2 men in black wool coats were already there, not depot workers, not railway inspectors, outsiders. One held a clipboard, the other carried a small wooden crate marked "Property of Chaos." Adler approached cautiously. "You boys with the rail company?" he asked. The man with the clipboard didn't look up. "We're here to collect unused materials." His tone was clean, practiced, a lie. The second man walked straight to the boxcar, reached underneath, and dragged something out. A burlap sack, large, wet, heavy. The bottom left a dark trail across the frost. "What's in that?" Adler demanded. The man gave a polite smile. "Just cargo spoiled in transit." But the sheriff's stomach tightened. The sack wasn't shaped like crates or grain bags. It sagged in the middle with 2 smaller bulges near the top, like... No, he told himself. Not that. The men hauled the sack toward their wagon. Then the sheriff saw it. As the sack swung, its top folded just slightly, and a small, pale hand slipped out. A child's hand. Blue. Still. Fingers curled inward as if in sleep. Adler's breath froze. "Stop right there," he barked, reaching for his pistol. The men didn't run. They didn't flinch. Instead, the one with the clipboard calmly stepped between Adler and the sack. "Sheriff," he said softly, "the cargo was damaged by cold exposure. We are simply disposing of it properly." "Cargo?" Adler snarled. "That is a child." "A deceased one," the man replied, voice flat. "And deceased property falls under federal transport jurisdiction, not yours." The calmness in his tone chilled Adler more than the morning air. "Why wasn't this reported?" Adler demanded. "It was," the man said. "Just not to you." The other man tightened the sack's drawstring, tucking the small hand back inside. As he lifted it again, something shifted within, a faint rustle, like fabric sliding over bone. Adler stepped forward, but the clipboard man held up a gloved hand. "You don't want to see inside, Sheriff." His eyes weren't threatening. They were pitying, as if Adler were too fragile for what lay beneath the burlap. "Where are you taking it?" Adler asked. "To the same place the missing 5 went." The man paused. "Back into the system." The wording punched the air from Adler's lungs. The system. The one that had lost 5 names weeks earlier. The one that had sealed a boxcar with something whispering inside. The one that had just dragged a dead child out into the open like spoiled cargo. The men loaded the sack onto the wagon. No rituals, no prayer, not even the courtesy of covering it fully. As they rode off, wheels crunching over frost, Adler felt the rails humming faintly beneath his boots. A tremor so subtle he almost missed it. It vibrated like a heartbeat. Or a warning. Somewhere down the line, train number 47 was still moving. And whatever was in that burlap sack wasn't the only thing the railway didn't want him to find. Mr. Alcott left Wood Hollow the next morning without ceremony, without farewell, and without a single explanation offered to the townsfolk who had watched him command the platform the day before. He had arrived with crisp paperwork, polished shoes, and the confidence of a man doing important work. Now he boarded the eastbound freight alone, carrying only a small leather case and a stack of unsorted documents. The depot porter remembered the way he moved, fast, stiff, avoiding eye contact, like a man afraid someone might ask him a question he could not answer. By noon, he had vanished from the rails. When the Children's Aid Society headquarters in New York received word that the sheriff of Wood Hollow had questions about train number 47, they attempted to reach Alcott for clarification. His telephone rang unanswered. His boarding house room was found empty. His trunk was missing. The landlady said he'd left before dawn, claiming urgent business out west. But no westbound tickets had been purchased under his name. No arrivals recorded. No telegraphs sent. It was as though he had stepped off the map entirely. Investigators from the CAS began reviewing his employment file, and that was where the unease began. Alcott had overseen 3 prior relocation trains in the last 4 years. All 3 had identical anomalies. Discrepancies in the number of children boarded versus children placed, mismatched ages between intake forms and placement records, and in each case, missing names, not 5 each time. Never the same number, but always some. The children simply vanished in the paperwork, absorbed into clerical silence. And every manifest, every single one, bore Alcott's signature at the bottom, neat and precise. A junior clerk, pale and sweating, brought the files to her supervisor. "These forms were altered," she whispered. "Look at the ink. Different pens. Differ. And pressure. Someone changed them after they were signed." The supervisor dismissed her at first, insisting it was routine correction. But when he examined the sheets closely, his expression shifted. The signatures were Alcott's, yes, but the numbers beside them had been tampered with. Children added, children removed, names overwritten. Most troubling was a note scrawled in the corner of one file dated 1903. Unfit for placement. Redirect quietly. The initials belonged to Alcott. When federal officers were finally looped in, quietly, discreetly, they attempted to locate him through banking records. His account had been emptied the day after train number 47 left New York. Not withdrawn in cash, but transferred to an unregistered holding office that vanished soon after. Someone had prepared his disappearance in advance. One detective, reviewing the last known sightings of Alcott, noted something unnerving. He had been observed speaking to several men at the rail yard in Kansas 2 days before train 47 passed through. Men not belonging to the station staff. Men who left no names on the duty roster. And then there were the letters. Unsheltered in a drawer at headquarters, addressed in Alcott's handwriting, but never mailed. Unsent apologies, unsent warnings. One simply read, "They were not lost, they were taken." By autumn, the official explanation listed Alcott as resigned, whereabouts unknown. Unofficially, however, investigators reached a darker conclusion. Alcott hadn't fled. He had been removed. Because he knew too much about the missing ones, and because someone, or something, didn't want the truth traveling with him. The first reports came from the section crew. 3 men who worked the night shift repairing the old spur line outside Wood Hollow. They were used to strange things. Coyotes howling, grain silos groaning in the wind, distant whistles echoing from passing freight. None of that bothered them. But on the night of February 11th, something new drifted across the prairie. A voice. Faint, thin, like a child speaking through cupped hands. At first the men thought it was wind tunneling under the frozen ties, but the whisper grew clearer as they approached the bend in the track, the same bend where train number 47 had slowed weeks earlier. One worker, Nate Barlow, dropped his lantern when he heard it. Because the whisper wasn't one voice, it was several, layered, hushed, like children trying not to be heard by an adult standing nearby. Nate swore he heard a small girl say, "Wait for me." Another said, "Don't open the door." The third, he refused to repeat. The crew abandoned their tools and left the site before midnight. They refused to return, even after the foreman threatened to fire them. The foreman laughed at their claims. He went out himself the next night. He didn't laugh afterward. He came back pale, jaw clenched tight, insisting the track needed no further night repairs. He offered no report, no explanation, only that the rail should be worked during daylight only. He never said what he heard, but his wife later told neighbors he slept with the lamp burning for 3 straight nights. Other stories came quickly after. A conductor passing through the empty spur reported hearing footsteps overhead on the roof of his rail car, light, quick, pattering like small feet running back and forth. When he checked the roof at the next stop, he found no prints, no snow disturbed, nothing to explain the sound. A brakeman traveling west insisted someone tugged at the hem of his coat while he was securing a coupler near the abandoned siding. He turned, expecting to find a child or a stray dog. No one was there. In Omaha, a telegraph operator said he received a short, broken transmission in a child's voice. "Stop the train, please stop." The origin code? Wood Hollow. Spur line. But no telegraph station existed there. Not anymore. The most chilling report came from a freight conductor named O'Malley, a man known for his hard skepticism and steady nerves. He was inspecting an empty cattle car just outside Dodge City when he heard it. Laughter. Soft. Distant. Children laughing somewhere behind him. He turned his lantern toward the doorway, expecting to find stowaways. The car was empty. But when he swung the lantern back toward the tracks, a cluster of small shadows stood between the rails, short, still, lined up in a row like children awaiting instruction. He blinked. The shadows were gone. Only the prairie grass swayed in the wind. O'Malley filed an incident report before going off duty. Heard voices belonging to neither crew nor passengers. Laughter, footsteps, multiple sources. If these were children, They were not alive. By March, railwaymen refused to walk the spur alone. Some wouldn't even ride past it. And those who did, they all said the same thing. Something is still out there. Something small. Something moving. Something following the path. Train number 47 left behind. Something waiting for the roll call to finish. The earliest record of the 5 missing children didn't come from Wood Hollow, or from train number 47, or even from the Children's Aid Society. It came from a single page in a farmer's ledger dated January 1902, 25 years before the train disappeared. Her name was Margaret Ellery, wife of a homesteader on the outskirts of Pawnee City, Nebraska. She kept meticulous notes: milk counts, crop yields, weather changes. She wasn't prone to exaggeration. Her handwriting was steady, practical, unromantic. But on the morning of January the 3rd, she wrote something so strange her descendants later circled the entry in red ink. Because what Margaret described matched the 5 missing children exactly. That morning had been bitter. The frost was so hard it cracked underfoot like glass, and the Ellery farm sat silent beneath a pale, frozen dawn. At first, Margaret thought the shapes near the barn were scarecrows blown loose by the wind. 5 of them. Small, motionless, standing in a crooked row. But as she stepped closer, her breath caught in her throat. They weren't scarecrows. They were children. Barefoot, clothed in thin, outdated garments. Dresses and coats decades out of fashion even in 1902. Their heads were bowed slightly, as if listening for something beneath the earth. One girl, the smallest, lifted her face. Margaret described her expression in 5 words. She looked at me knowingly. The child's skin was pale as frost, lips faintly blue, eyes dark and glassy, yet she wasn't shivering. None of them were. They stood perfectly still, their hands loose at their sides. Margaret called out to them, once, twice, louder the 3rd time. None answered. She turned to run for her husband, but before she reached the house, she glanced back. They were gone. Not walking away, not running. Gone. The frost around the barn remained perfectly smooth. No footprints, no dragmark. Archaeas, no disturbances of any kind. 5 children appearing and vanishing on a morning so cold, even rabbits stayed in their burrows. Margaret wrote in her ledger, 5 little ghosts in the frost, not ghosts of the dead, ghosts of the lost. Her husband dismissed the sighting as a trick of the light. The pastor called it nonsense. The county sheriff laughed. But Margaret never forgot. When she told the story again in 1914, she added a detail she had originally left out. One of the children, an older boy, held something in his right hand. A folded paper tag. The kind the Children's Aid Society used to identify orphan train riders. She knew because she'd seen such tags pinned to children's coats when trains passed through Pawnee City years later. In 1930, months before her death, Margaret repeated the story a final time to a visiting church historian. She insisted the children were real, but not alive in the way people understood. Her last recorded words about the encounter were whispered to her daughter. They were waiting for someone to find them, or someone to call their names. When researchers revisited her ledger decades later, they realized something chilling. 5 children stood in Margaret Ellery's yard in 1902. The same 5 children erased from the manifest of train number 47 in 1907, meaning they were missing before they ever boarded the train. In 1937, the Children's Aid Society hired a young historian named Walter Hemsley to organize decades of misfiled placement records. He expected dust, monotony, and the usual bureaucratic clutter. He did not expect to find the most disturbing evidence of the orphan trains ever recorded. The discovery began with a broken box. A wooden file crate split at the corner, spilling yellowed papers onto the floor of the archive basement. Hemsley knelt to gather them. brushing off cobwebs as he sorted files back into chronological order. That's when he noticed something strange. 2 sets of records for the same date, the same train, the same route. Train number 47, New York to Nebraska. Departure, January 1907. He frowned. Duplicate files were common, but these weren't duplicates. The first manifest listed 31 children. Names, ages, notes on health, and small photographs pinned beside several of the cards. The second manifest listed only 26 children, with 5 names missing entirely. Not crossed out, not left blank, removed, erased as if they had never existed. Both files carried the CAS watermark, both carried identical date stamps, and both, impossibly, were signed by Mr. Alcott. Hemsley flipped through the papers again, slower this time, examining every signature stroke, every ink blot, every scribble of the fountain pen. It made no sense. Why would Alcott sign 2 conflicting official records on the same day? And why would one list children the other pretended were never there? Hemsley took the manifests to the chief archivist, an elderly woman who'd worked with the society since before the turn of the century. Her reaction unsettled him. She didn't lean in to read the papers. She didn't reach for her spectacles. She simply whispered, "Not again." When he asked what she meant, she refused to elaborate. Instead, she ordered him, firmly, to file the documents back, where he found them, and leave them be. But Hemsley couldn't. That night, long after the building emptied, he returned to the basement with a magnifying glass and a desk lamp. He spread both manifests out side by side. That was when he noticed a faint indentation at the bottom of the 26-child manifest, letters pressed into the paper, not written in ink. A phrase written onto the page underneath before someone tore it out. "Remove the 5." The handwriting wasn't Alcott's. It wasn't any CAS clerk's either. It was jagged, heavy, childlike. As if written by a hand that didn't know how to hold a pen. Hemsley felt his throat tighten. He checked the 5 missing names again, searching for any indication of placement, transfer, or death. Nothing. No files. No notes. No history. They had simply vanished from the paper trail of the United States. He returned the next morning with the intent to confront his supervisor, but the manifests were gone. All of them. In their place was a note. "Do not pursue these names. Some trains were not meant to be traced." It was unsigned. Hemsley resigned 2 weeks later. He never told the society why. But his diary, found years after his death, contained one final line under the entry for 1937. There were 31 children on train number 47. There were always 31. The records changed. The children didn't. Today, the old rail line is nothing more than a shallow scar across the prairie, a raised strip of earth swallowed by tall grass and wind. The tracks were torn out in 1949, the ties burned, the metal sold for scrap. The last depot rotted away decades ago, its platform now a nest for field mice and tangled weeds. But in winter, especially in blizzards, the land remembers. Locals say that's when the train returns. Not the locomotive itself, not iron or steam or wheels, but the sound of it. A faint whistle drifting across the plains, thin as breath on a cold window. A shiver in the wind that cuts against the grain fields at night. A low hum, almost like rails vibrating beneath snow that hasn't held a track in half a century. Those who've heard it never forget. One January evening in 1972, a rancher named Charles Finley was repairing a fence on the north pasture when he heard the whistle. 2 long notes, one short, exactly like the old Orphan engines used. He thought at first it was a truck horn blown by distant highway travelers. Then he heard it again, closer, cutting through the snowfall. He stood still, trying to locate the direction. The sound grew louder, rolling across the prairie with impossible clarity, like a locomotive approaching a station that no longer existed. Finley swore he saw a faint orange glow through the whiteout, a line of light moving steadily across the emptiness where the tracks had once been. He waved his lantern, shouting for help, and that's when he heard it. Footsteps, small ones, shuffling behind him in the snow. He turned, lantern shaking in his hand. Nothing, only wind. But the footsteps came again, moving in a slow, wandering arc around him. When he swung the lantern low, he saw 5 dark impressions forming in the snow, though no feet made them. 5. He dropped the lantern and ran. A schoolteacher driving home from a late meeting in 1988 reported seeing children standing along the old rail bed, 5 faint silhouettes facing the road. She slowed, thinking they were lost. But as her headlights passed over them, their outlines faded like steam in cold air. She drove home trembling, her wipers scraping ice from the windshield. The next morning she returned with her husband. No tracks, no prints, only untouched snow. Today, hunters, ranchers and truckers still report strange things after dark. A soft tapping along the sides of their vehicles, light footsteps pacing the gravel, high, breathy whispers weaving through the wind like children asking to be let in. Some claim that if you stand still long enough, the air grows colder. The prairie falls silent, and you can feel the rumble of wheels pass under your feet, even though the ground doesn't move. And in certain storms, the harsh ones, the white ones, people say you can hear the knocking again. Slow at first, then urgent, as if hands inside a wooden boxcar door are begging to be found. No one answers. Because everyone in these parts knows the truth. Train number 47 never arrived. Train number 47 never stopped. And on winter nights, when the prairie goes quiet and the wind sharpens its teeth, train number 47 still comes, trying to finish the roll call, trying to return the children no one claimed, trying to deliver the 5 who never belonged anywhere except the shadows between the tracks. And that brings us to the end of tonight's historical mystery. What do you think happened to the missing 5 children of Train 47? Were they taken? Lost? Or did something else happen in that long winter of 1899? Let me know your theories in the comments. I love reading what you uncover. If you enjoyed tonight's story, make sure to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into America's forgotten mysteries. Until next time, sleep well, if you can.